Welcome, everyone, to week 8.
No.
Joking, week 7. We're not skipping God's number. Last week was Satan's number. This week is God's number.
We said we weren't going to mention that again.
But welcome to the Renew You podcast.
Welcome to Podcasting in Our Pajamas.
Podcasting in our pajamas, podcasting at 9:38 p.m.
Feels like midnight.
Feels like midnight on a Monday night. And I thought we'd start the podcast differently.
Oh. I thought you were going to say, this special delayed episode is brought to you by a sinus infection.
Or inflammation.
Or migraine. Or who knows?
Who knows? But I thought we would start taking some of the comments. And the introduction to the podcast would be each week taking one comment and speaking to that.
Is it a question?
It could be a question. It could be anything. It could be any type of comment.
Okay.
This week's is this. On the channel, you should cover some tough faith questions.
Just any of them?
Yeah. What is one tough faith question that you have answered in the last month?
In the last month?
Or the last 6 months? Anyone come to mind?
Well, I've been in Mars Hill on Wednesday nights, which is just answering questions. But nothing, I don't think, nothing out of the ordinary that, had the room stumped. Let me think. Probably it would be a question somebody asked in young adults. I don't remember what the question was, but I do know that before we jumped into our verse-by-verse study in young adults, which it's been a while, so this is probably longer than 6 months, somebody asked, how do we know that we can trust the Bible? Because a lot of times people use a verse from the Bible to try to explain why you should trust the Bible, but if you already don't trust the Bible, a verse from the Bible. For example, if somebody was like, why do you trust that the Bible is God's word? And then they said, all scripture is inspired by God and is useful for teaching. And well, that came out of the Bible. Mm-hmm. So you can't, that's circular reasoning. And actually, in preparation for that class, one of the best resources I think that we have is in the lobby. Actually, we have the Building Blocks book that Siri and Stacy worked on. It's from a class, and there's a whole chapter in there about the historical accuracy of the Bible and the way that it was put together. And there's a bug in our house. So that's super helpful. I used some resources out of that, which obviously, there's kind of two different ways to approach it. There's the question of, can I trust the Bible at all? And that's when that comes really in handy about there are other historical documents that prove the historical accuracy of the Bible. But then sometimes there is a question of, how do I know that we should still use the Old Testament? And how come we're not only New Testament believers? Because some sects of, I know that bug's getting me, of Christianity are New Testament only. And that one's easier to maybe explain to somebody who's wrestling with that, because Jesus quoted a lot of Old Testament scripture. You actually said that yesterday, I think, that Jesus...
Yeah, I forget what the percentage is, but it's pretty wild how much of his teaching. I want to say the Bible Project, it's like 70-something% of his teaching references an Old Testament story. And honestly, even through like Paul's writings, you're probably going to be pretty lost. Like, I'm even thinking about a couple weeks ago, Corinthians, he's using the Israelites as an example.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I feel like we were able to kind of explain that. And, but the question was, how do you answer hard biblical?
No. It was just we should answer some tough
Oh
ones.
yeah.
But a couple of resources on that one. It's a good intro. Is number one. There's a sermon that's pretty short. It's 37 minutes long. It's called "Has the Bible Been Corrupted?" Perspective, Has the Bible Been Corrupted? And it's from Ben Stewart at Passion City Church, DC, and he really breaks down like a ton of just super interesting things. One of which being that like really we have more information about the Bible than we do almost any other historical document
Yeah.
that people say is valid.
Yeah.
And on top of that, a lot of it then gets brought up of, well, does our Bible still mean the same thing it meant back then? And there's variations obviously, but then he breaks down like there's very few variations that change the meaning of something. Most of it is a spelling error or et cetera, et cetera. But it's really cool if you like want to explore that and want to be able to answer people's questions. Great resource, a short resource. And then there's also recently, and I haven't watched all of this one yet, to be honest, but I love the guy. I've watched a lot of the guys. I follow him on Instagram. And if you want just somebody to follow on Instagram to get a lot of biblical knowledge from, like this type of, can we trust the Bible? His name's Wesley Huff. And he's a great follow, but he also went on the Joe Rogan podcast, and that's about 3 hours and 15 minutes. And that's him talking to a non-believer. And Joe Rogan uses expletives in that one and stuff like that. So if that's going to offend you, maybe don't watch it. But I think it's cool to watch somebody as educated as Wesley Huff have a conversation with someone that's very educated and that doesn't believe it all, but is searching. And it just gives you kind of a good window into maybe how to have that conversation. Well, awesome. So that'll be a new way we start the podcast. That means the podcast is going to be a little bit longer because I'm just now starting the timer for the actual podcast. But I'm
starting the timer for bedtime.
but hopefully we can answer some questions. Keep commenting them. Hopefully the comments are now open. We did discover, yes, I believe they are. But yeah, and we announced the T-shirt winner. We didn't do it on the podcast.
Did they get their T-shirt?
I don't know. Casey was supposed to reach out if you haven't got your T-shirt yet. But I think we commented in the deal, and then we also posted Instagram.
Gotcha.
I think Casey's handling it. If not, shout us out. But yeah. Anyways, so now we'll jump into what Renew You podcast is all about, and that's this Sunday's message, Holy Rollers.
Rolling.
I have this song in my head. I'm actually contemplating. I'm not saying that we're doing this yet. I'm contemplating kind of moving into a new series of sermons really centered around this flow of thought. But I have a song stuck in my head it's like, wait, what is it? I've got a picture of it.
Oh no.
You don't like it?
So far not
Whoa.
good.
If somebody put some music in it, here come the Holy Rollers. Here come the Holy Rollers.
We'll get Evan on that. Evan, if you're watching this right now,
here come the
please
Holy Rollers.
help Grant to make
Holy Rollers.
Okay.
But yeah, it was a fun sermon to preach. I didn't feel like I really did it justice in a lot of ways, but it was fun to preach nonetheless.
Yeah, I heard it first service, and it was very good. And then remind me to say something funny in a second that I just think is hilarious. Then I stepped out after I did announcement second service to go check on the picnic, which was so fun, by the way. And then when I came back in, you were walking in circles around the auditorium. So I do feel like I need to go back and watch the live stream because I feel like I missed something, which reminds me of my point. There's a groupie group at our church that has caught on to Grant Glaze first service versus Grant Glaze second service, and they've started attending both services, which is really messing with our capacity numbers, but that's okay. Because a lot of times I feel like in first service your message is clearer to what you intended to deliver in your notes, and then second service is just like we don't know what we're gonna get. And so sometimes I'll go in, I'm like, first service was really my favorite because of the way my brain works, very organized. But then there's a crowd that loves a good marching around the auditorium in second service. So also shout out to Miss Daisy, because the best part of first service
Miss Daisy.
is Miss Daisy.
We need more Miss Daisies in our life.
Shouting you down while you preach. I love her so much. So anyways, so all of that to say, I feel like based on what I heard, maybe I missed some aspects of your message in second service.
Second service was really a lot more of kind of my heart for the morning, for sure.
But you got, I mean, amped up in first service too.
Yeah, first service we just ran out of time.
If you want to get out on time, go to first service. Just kidding.
Yeah, we just ran out of time. And honestly, second service, I will be honest. I don't know how transparent I should be on the podcast.
Everyone's gonna get offended.
No, there's an element of our services and our flow that for me feel very restrictive, and so we've been doing some things to kind of move that around. And this Sunday was kind of the new flow that I don't know if we'll officially move into this flow the rest of the time once I start preaching, because I won't be preaching next week. Your dad is. But second service, there was something that happened during worship at the end of worship where we kind of went back into worship a little bit and got into it. And there was just something in my spirit, something in my soul that was like, okay, this feels like who we are. Like, this feels like us. This feels like home. And so it really just kind of, I think more than anything, the reason second service ended up going down a different route is like, I kind of felt, it's weird to say, but in some ways, and even as I've been processing through today, that's why I feel like, and this, I don't even know how much this is good information for the podcast, so I'm sorry if I'm boring your brains out, but part of what I'm processing through even today of if I stay in this lane of thought of holy rollers or go back into and do, is there's part of me that feels like something shifted Sunday. And obviously we were installed in January, but we've always been kind of eyeing March for the time where we make some small tweaks to like service and doing nights of renewal and things like that. And there was just something that it felt like we stepped into a new season on Sunday. At least for me, that's how I felt. And that's really, second service really went down that vein, because it was like, okay, I feel like a fire in my belly to like, I feel like it's time to like take this place somewhere. Not somewhere it's never been, or not somewhere because it's nowhere, but just like, I feel like the Lord is like pushing a little bit. Awesome.
I can't wait to go back and listen to second service. One thing that I thought was really beneficial from the message yesterday, and I think you switched up maybe the object lesson just a little bit for second service.
I didn't switch up second service. And the funny thing was, second service, you missed this.
Oh, no.
I don't even know why I included this one in the X. Because I always go back and listen to my messages and reevaluate. And I'm thinking, Grant, why'd you include it? Initially, it was supposed to be comic relief. But it didn't work out for comic relief second service, because the first egg I drew out of the bad X was murder.
Oh, no.
Because they were random.
That definitely landed better first service when
it was supposed to be like kind of a comedic relief, like middle of it, like,
all
yeah.
All right, guys, I need to talk to you about something. Everybody that's been actively engaged in murder lately.
Yeah, but when it was the first one you drew, like right after you went into like this whole point of like being holy, it was like, oh wait, everybody like kind of loses. Sorry.
Yeah. And I also noticed second service, the blue eggs came out, or the green eggs.
I filled up the jar with them because I realized second service, the jar still looked empty without them.
You live and you learn. That is a valid point, because your hand kept covering up the index cards. Yeah. But back to what I was saying. But now I lost my train of thought. No, that is great. One thing I liked about your sermon illustration that I noticed is there was a pattern. Every time you opened a pink egg, there was a pattern where you said why we need to get rid of that. And a lot of them were like, because it destroys relationship, undoes the plan of God. And then when you pulled the green eggs out, or in
The cards.
first service, the cards out for those of you watching from our 8:30 crew. It reminded me a lot of like Jesus on the beach with Peter, where Peter 3 times denied Jesus, and 3 times Jesus gives Peter an opportunity at redemption.
Interesting.
And it kind of undoes. So there was an undoing in the ridding of the pink egg. And then there was, and like you said, like the point was but he doesn't just leave us empty.
Mm-hmm.
There was a redeeming of that pink egg in the green egg. And so I thought that was a really good visual, but it also, I think, is a pattern of how God works. And maybe even Peter is a good example of that holiness, of it wasn't just emptying his tendency to be a denier or emptying his tendency to cop out under pressure, but it was also filling up with, I do love you and I'm going to go feed your sheep. And so I thought that landed really well. I thought that was a really good demonstration.
Well, it really was birthed out of, I was thinking about the idea of holiness. Really, the sermon started at, I was praying going into spring break camp, because I knew once spring break camp happens, we're going to be recovering from that. I need to kind of have an idea of where we're going for the Sunday after. And all I really felt like God gave me is like, holiness is supposed to be an overflow. The picture was supposed to be like, I feel like so often we think holiness is just getting rid of bad things.
Yeah.
But that's such a terrible picture of holiness. And that leads to a really boring life.
Yeah.
Like if you just come over to my house and like we think we're holy just because we don't cuss and we don't drink and we don't yell at each other, or we don't like, that's not really a life-giving house.
Yeah.
You can be lacking all those things and still not be a life-giving house.
True.
So holiness really is not just the lack of something, it's the presence of something. And then on top of that, the illustration really fell short, and I really didn't have enough time to expound further, but I really wanted to get into this whole other point of that we get full and now we have life, but then there's supposed to be this complete overflow where there's living water, where like it's constantly being let out of us, and then God's constantly refilling us up, and it's constantly being let out of us. And like holiness is hungry, so holiness is always giving out life, but then it's hungry, so then it's getting filled up with life, then it's giving out life, then it's because through thirst and hunger for righteousness will be filled. And so yeah, it was really like supposed to be that kind of picture, because I think so often people's picture of holiness is people that are good people that don't do bad things. But the Bible Project lays out holiness so beautifully in one of its podcasts, where it talks about holiness is really the essence of God, and it's the essence that produces life.
Yeah.
And that's why there's this undercurrent in the New Testament of life and death, is because really when we operate outside of God's design, we're breaking his good design and causing death.
Yeah.
And when we operate in his good design, we're creating life.
You asked at the beginning of your message, what do you immediately think of when you think of the word holy? And for me, my mind almost went to this image of like somebody like very like tense and uptight. And then as you unwound the fact that whatever your perception of that word is, like that would be your perception of God. And then in my mind, it's like, oh, well then, yeah, that's off, because you always say like heaven's into parties, like God's a celebrator of things. But I do think that some people who would view holiness as an uptightness or a tenseness might view God as uptight or tense. And so I think that that's important too, to realize like any misperception or misconception that I have of holiness is probably a misconception I have about who God is. Like, and now that I see that holiness is an adventure, that helps me to wrap my mind around the fact that God is a God of adventure. Now that I see that holiness is a matter of extending my life or pouring my life out, that reminds me God is a God who extended his life to me and poured his life out. So correcting that definition or correcting that understanding isn't just important so that we aren't boring, or isn't just important so that we don't avoid holiness, but it's also important because it's good to have a right view of God. So I think that was a really good way, even for me, to make that connection as part of the message.
I'm glad that was connected. I didn't feel like I did as good a job of that as I wanted to, and I definitely didn't feel like, I feel like I did a little bit better job leading into that first service than I did second service. But that really was part of my heart, is because I just got to thinking about it, and I realized that if you were to tell me to think of holiness, to get a picture of who I think of when I think of holiness, in a non-spiritual setting, in a non-spiritual answer, my real answer, not my right answer, which that's a whole nother podcast. Most of us live with what we think is the right answer, and it's not really our real answer, and that's what, anyways. So my real answer would not be Jesus. But Jesus is God personified. And so Jesus is the perfect picture of holiness. And that's why and like I said, I didn't connect this as well as I wanted to get people to understand this. But what I was trying to get people to understand is when we look at Jesus, we don't see someone that's boring and empty. We don't see someone that is just like holier than thou and intense. Mm-hmm. He was intense when he had to be. Yeah. But he was living this wild life. Yeah. This wild adventure. And
I love that you gave a really well-rounded series of examples on Jesus' holiness, because I think for people who maybe view holiness like would be my initial response, then Jesus in the temple would be like the go-to of Jesus is holy because he's flipping stuff over, he's ticked, and he's, driving everybody out. See, Jesus is holy. And now if I only look at that example of Jesus, I associate holiness with like being so like harsh, or not that Jesus was harsh in that moment, he was fully justified. But if that's the only image of Jesus, like I do sometimes think that that's the only story of Jesus that some people know of, like, he got mad and flipped tables. But to see that picture, and then the picture of Jesus in the wilderness, and then the other one was...
The main one I think of that I just didn't have enough time to because it would be a whole sermon in itself, but thinking about the reality that Jesus was holiness while he was sitting at Zacchaeus' house. Yeah. That's a guy at a dinner party with a bunch of people.
At a fun dinner party, because everyone was like, they're a bunch of sinners.
At a fun dinner party with people that are crooks, with people that are lost, and he is just on a random day walking by a tree and is like, hey, we're having a dinner party tonight. And I think about my number one conviction day, I was actually outside the day playing baseball, and I saw our neighbor. I said hi to him, and I was literally internally praying, Lord, will you give me a creative way to build relationship with our neighbors. And I really am asking Lord, because I want to love our neighbors. I don't want to, that's what I was talking about on Sunday. We could go meet a lot of other Christians and get them to come to Life Church. I want to find people that aren't going to church anywhere and bring them to Life Church. And so I'm thinking, you put that in that context, you mean to tell me that a pursuit of holiness will lead you to random days where you're walking down the road and you walk past your neighbor who's mowing his lawn or whatever, and you're like, hey man, let's have a dinner party tonight. And you have a dinner party with and that's a picture of holiness. Yeah. That's just, that gives so much more adventure to holiness than, hey, I don't cuss. Which I'm not saying we should cuss. I just preached about that a few weeks ago. But I'm just saying, if that is our definition of holiness, I don't do bad things. And when I see people doing bad things, I get a whip and I throw them out.
Being holy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the first things that jumps into my mind when I think of holiness is the idea of holy ground. And I think that you just have that ingrained in my head from themes for forever with Life High.
It's been the spring break camp. It's been the camp theme with the other theme every year.
Yeah. But even that's a good picture. If we're going to call spring break camp Life High Spring Break Camp, holy, like, and you're like, oh yes, like uptight, serious, or like empty, then everybody needs to hop on a bus next year and go with Noah to spring break camp, because the kids, the teenagers even recognize that as holy.
Yeah.
And that's like, hey, what's your favorite thing you've done in all of 2025? Oh, easy, spring break camp. What was the best thing we did in 2024? Oh, easy, encounter in spring break camp. And I love that they're learning to associate holy ground, like a holy place, a holy moment, with some of their best moments, like with the Lord and with just friends and with just having fun. And I think that we could all kind of take a lesson from that.
Yeah. Yeah, and even when you say that, like, I think through the Bible Project has a really cool podcast on holiness that will give you a lot more information on holiness. It's a Q&R that they did in response to their holiness video. And like, if you want to learn a breakdown of holiness, go there. I mean, it's beautiful. But really on Sunday, like, I was trying to think of really what the Lord put in my heart is this idea of this overflow. And it was all landing towards the end of the message. And the end of the message was really all I cared about communicating, to be honest with you. The end of the message was what I wanted to burn in people's hearts, is that my picture of holiness is the person that's like separated from everyone else. And that's true. Holiness is set apartness. Mm-hmm. But if you only look at holiness as a definition and you don't put it, that's why I love that part as be holy, like as your God is holy, be holy. To me, that says, don't just be holy how your God is holy. And our God was in his holiness, his distinctness, his uniqueness. When he could have been set apart and stayed apart, he didn't run away from impurity. He moved towards impurity. Yeah. And he always said he was going to do this. There was periods of time where his presence was guarded, but he always was prophesying he was going to do this. Isaiah, we see this beautiful picture in Isaiah where the coal is taken and purity touches impurity and changes impurity. It's a picture of what Jesus is going to do. We see this prophecy in Ezekiel of water running out of the temple and going out all over all the earth, causing everything to become pure and like a garden. It's purity leaving the temple and running out all over the earth to the impurity to make it pure. We see Jesus come onto the scene and he's touching lepers. He's touching the sick. Purity is touching impurity, and it's not worried about touching impurity because the inside of the bowl is clean. Yeah. And so it's like, okay, so how do we live out our holiness? Well, our holiness is actually supposed to lead us to be able to help. And so I think of that. And then the 1 Peter verse, when I read that the first time, gird up your loins of your mind.
My favorite moment from second service that I did not miss was when you asked the junior high kids, do you guys know what gird up your loins is? And they were like, no. I was like, don't explain it to them, but you didn't.
I was like, we'll get to it at the end of the message. But when I read the Message translation of it, it was like, this is perfect. This is literally what I feel like my message is about. And it's roll up your sleeves. Yeah. And that's what God did with his holiness. He rolled up his sleeves. And then it was like, oh, holy rollers. Like, there's the message.
Yeah. That first image you said of when you sometimes think of it, you think of this person like off by themselves. Like, I do think like people would associate holiness with isolation. Mm-hmm. In order to maintain my holiness, I have to stay isolated so that I don't become contaminated. Mm. And the beauty of the gospel when it transforms your life is that I can stay uncontaminated without staying isolated. Mm. Jesus remained uncontaminated, but he was never, other than times of prayer, he was not isolated from people. Jesus didn't have to. He even
brought people with him to pray sometimes.
That's true. He didn't have to stay 10 feet away from the disciples so that he wouldn't compromise his holiness. Yeah. His holiness was so secure and so overflowing that he was able to maintain his holiness in the middle of the chaos. And that's called spiritual maturity. Mm. Like spiritual immaturity is having to stay isolated so I don't compromise my holiness. And And there is a season everyone goes through, I think, where we just are spiritually immature because we're new.
No, that's a great point,
Like-
that there's seasons of spiritual maturity where you probably need to be avoiding
Sure.
the dinner party.
Like, when you just got saved and you've been living in the world for 30, 40 years, it's probably not a bad idea to go somewhere else next Friday night, because there's just a lack of developed holiness.
There's a lack of holiness. I mean, honestly, like, that's one of the things that I kept thinking of throughout this message, is that our holiness, we think our holiness is proven when we don't do bad things or when we do good things. Our holiness is actually proven according to Jesus and according to how God operates. Holiness is actually proven when you come into impure environments and you create purity in impure environments, where you come into dead environments and you bring life into them.
It's good.
So it's actually like, that's actually the proof of holiness,
Yeah.
is being able to do that. And if you can't do that, then it's not condemnation, it's just observation. There may be seasons where you need to develop holiness before you step into environments to bring holiness.
And that is wisdom. That is wisdom, because holiness is something that comes with transformation. Holiness isn't something that happens in a full sense immediately at salvation. Obviously, we become set apart because we belong to him, but the fullness of the outpouring of the holiness, that takes time. And so, that is a really good point. It probably is good to have some self-awareness about how spiritually mature we are. I've been following Jesus 31 minus 4, 27 years. And so most scenarios in my life, I've been walking with Jesus truly long enough that I can and should be able to maintain my holiness in the middle of some chaos. But I also know some things about me in self-awareness where, hey, that would be more opportunity for me to not demonstrate holiness in certain scenarios, and I need to develop into more maturity in those areas. And it's just using wisdom and discernment and being led by the Holy Spirit. But it's also not shying away from those things because I'm not there yet.
Yeah, it's good. And I just think I think Sunday was more of, and I even said this second service, I wasn't trying to give people details on how to be holy. I was trying to give more of this picture that made you passionate for holiness, and this picture of what is true holiness.
Yeah.
And so, like, these handles are good for people because that's true. Like, you can have a passion and be pursuing holiness and have a picture of what true holiness is, and still in a season understand, like, I probably shouldn't go into that environment.
Yeah.
The Holy Spirit is telling me, hey, don't do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great, and really one of the things holiness is that I didn't get into is, it's funny because we actually can't really be holy as God is holy. Like, when you actually break down the definition, if you break down the definition of holy, that's actually impossible for us, because his version of holiness is that he is the unique creator of everything.
Right. Yeah.
We can't do that. So what it's speaking to is it's be holy as I'm holy is speaking to honoring God as holy and living a lifestyle that honors God.
Yeah.
Well, the truth is that a lifestyle that honors God in one season looks different than a lifestyle that honors God in another season, because it's really staying dependent and connected to God.
Yeah, that's so good. What honoring God looks like 10 days into salvation is wildly different than what honoring God looks like 10 years into it. And that's the beautiful thing about a pursuit of holiness, is God has given us the ability to honor him today where we are, and he calls that good.
He calls it righteousness, according to what he said about Abraham.
Yeah.
To Abraham, his faith was accounted to him as righteousness.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, our righteousness comes from Christ. But I mean, in God's kingdom, like, that is right living.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
And then really where we can finish off today is just thinking about our church. And I just, like I said, I mean, I don't know how transparent to be on the podcast. It is what it is, but I just sense that, like, and we've been talking about the Lord renewing some things and stuff like that. And even the picnic was a beautiful picture, like, and even just looking at the story of everything and watching everything, watching all the videos and watching the video and service and everything like that, like, and you've been around for a lot more of the church than I have, obviously, but I just sense that, like, there's some things that got us to where we are today that, like, have to be renewed in us. Our church is beautiful and it's filled with beautiful people, and I think everybody's doing their best. And so what I'm saying isn't saying that our church isn't a bunch of people doing their best, but I just do sense that there's this void of space that needs to be filled with hunger, and the space that needs to be filled with passion, and the space that needs to be filled with dreaming, and the space that needs to be filled with serving. And I think in some ways since COVID, I think, and I was even talking to somebody, I think it was even JW with this about even like the media team. Like, I think in some ways since COVID, we really haven't seen the same as pre-COVID when it comes to just serving and hands in and everything like that. And this is a long rambling point, but basically I'm just saying I've sensed that, like, it's time to build again. It's time to dream again. It's time to serve again. It's time to put our pedal on the gas again.
Pedal on the gas.
Put our foot
on the gas pedal.
On the gas pedal again. There used to be a saying, this is not a very churchy saying, but our coaches used to always tell us in baseball, like, once you have someone on the side of the cliff, don't just sit there. Like, put your foot on their neck and
your coaches seemed like such nice people.
And go out their throat and push them off the cliff. And it was just this picture of, like, it was just this picture of
That's not
in
the
a
gospel.
game. And it's not gospel, but it is when it comes to the enemy.
There you go.
In
Push
a game,
Satan off a cliff.
there really is this idea of, in a game, if you jump out to an early lead, psychologically you get comfortable and you let teams back in the game when you really could have just put your foot on the pedal and thrown them off the side of the cliff. And I think the same thing can happen in the church world. I think when you have facilities like ours, I think when you have history like ours, I think everybody can kind of go like, man, we've got the devil on the side of the cliff. Like, look at everything we've done, and can kind of get comfortable. And I think, no, like, now's the time that, like, we double down on everything. Now's the time we push. Now's the time we dream. Now's the time we put our foot on the devil's throat and say, like, no, you're, like, we're taking every ounce of victory we can in this county and in this region. So
it's good.
More than anything, I'm just saying, if there's a practical application to Sunday as a church member of Life, I think it is pursue holiness and dream. Like, ask the Lord, what is your part to play?
Yeah.
I mean, think about all the different people that built Life Church. Like, I mean, you know more of them than I do, but I mean, think of some of their stories. Like,
yeah.
Who's the first lady? Francis. I mean, gave us the land.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. We were just even talking to some friends today who you've told them multiple times, like, they have a gift of generosity. Like, God has positioned and created them to be givers and to be generous, not just of money, but of time and of creativity. And that's a role that, as they've stepped into it, it's changed the feel and the fabric of our youth ministry. And I can't imagine without them there what spring break camp would have been like, or what X, Y, and Z students' lives would have been like, because they wouldn't have been at spring break camp. There have been humans on the other side of their obedience. And that's so true. Like, God's purposes and God's places for his people are creative and they're unique, just as he is creative and he's made us unique.
Oh.
And there are some roles in our church that I would be terrible at. You wouldn't want me in them. You don't want me designing things. Like, it would be,
You're right, I
it
don't.
would look like, what was that, word art or whatever that was we used to have.
It's actually low key in right now. It's kind of trending.
Well, then maybe I should help. But it's just true. Like, if I were to be like, well, everybody is highly valuing creatives right now, so I need to be creative. Not only would I be frustrated, but the church would not be benefiting. But there are things that I am gifted in, and it might not be the trendiest thing in the moment, but hopefully it's making the difference in the lives of a few people. And that's true for every single person in our church. You might not be the most outgoing person, but you have a extremely gifted mind. You might be the next tithe and offering counter, and we don't even know that you're great at math and you're integrous. But just things that, like, people don't think about of ways to serve at the church.
Yeah, I just think there's so many different ways. I mean, yeah, like going back to Francis, like not even just like the giving of the land and that, but then like going to the bank and like fighting for them to give us the loan. And like, I mean, you think of Bob, like building everything.
Everything.
You think of, I mean, even as simple as like, Elizabeth Day this week introducing us to the couple from Illinois that they met at Giovanni. I mean, that they met at Giovanni's for dinner and invite them to their table. And I mean, I just think there's so many. My main thing is just dream again.
Yeah.
Don't be a comfortable American church Christian. Just dream. And I sense that in my spirit, you know? And I just want to, we can't say yes to everything, obviously. We have to be leaders and we have to say no to some things, but I do want to be a leader, and I do want us to be a place where it's like people can help build the church through their gifts and through what they're called to. And so, I just feel like it's a fresh season for that. It's not that it hasn't happened. It's not that it hasn't even been happening. There's elements of that have been happening, but I just feel like the Spirit is breathing out fresh wind, and don't sit on the sidelines. Roll up your sleeves and get to work.
And just keep showing up.
Like said, we're going to bed.
We are going to bed. We love you.
Just keep showing up. We love you. Nights of Renewal, March 30th.
Yeah.
Childcare provided, 6 to 8 p.m. It's going to be nights set apart. And it's going to be beautiful.
We'll see you Sunday.
Just keep showing up. We love you. Peace.